views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users. On demand on iTunes, on demand on YouTube, on demand at my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you can post your comments on a whole lot of stories that we have on there, including one that really fired me up today. Did you know that you could pay your rent and still get evicted? You could pay your rent on time and still get evicted, and it is perfectly legal. Take a look at that story. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. Well, those of you who are regulars to this show know that I find excuses whenever possible to support causes both on the show and off the show, causes that support our returning veterans and our active duty soldiers and their families. And you know that my position has always been, and it always will remain, that whether you are in favor or not of the various military actions that this country, mine in particular, the United States of America, is engaged in, we do not hold any ill will towards the brave men and women who volunteer to protect this nation. Many of them pay the supreme sacrifice. Many of them come back with physical injuries. Many of them come back with emotional injuries. Some of them come back with problems that are ticking time bombs that don't manifest themselves until years later. And yet, I will tell you, it is the most professional Army, probably, or armed services, probably in the history of the world. And they are fine men and women who volunteer their time to serve their country, and we owe them our thanks, our gratitude, our respect. And sometimes, sadly, ladies and gentlemen, this country has not been as forthcoming in assisting them when they return. But the good thing about the American people is when the government is unable to or unwilling to extend a proper hand to our returning veterans, we band together and we do so. And our next guest, who has served our country so brilliantly for many years until his recent retirement, is, believe it or not, donating 100% of the royalties of his new book to the USO Hospital Services Fund. U.S. Army Brigadier General A.J. Tata. The name of his book is Sudden Threat. It is a work of fiction, but it describes what is really happening on the strategic and operational levels in the United States military. And I will say, before I turn the microphone over to the General, I want you to buy this book. I want you to buy this book not just because it is a good read, but in addition, the money is going to a terrific cause. General Tata, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com, and thank you for your service to this nation.
Thank you, Gary, for that very eloquent preamble. Well said. And, you know, I was doing a book signing the other day, and a elderly gentleman said to me, "Aren't you worried about this current generation?" And I said, "Sir, you can worry about the world, because these young men and women coming into the military today are the best I've ever seen, and they all know when they sign that dotted line that they're going to combat, and they're motivated to make a difference and serve their country and help keep us all free."
Well, I am active myself in two organizations that help returning veterans, one in my native Michigan and one in New Jersey, where I live now. And I've had the honor and the privilege to meet many of these men and women who have returned. And I would just say that nothing more could be said than what you just said. I agree 100% with your assessment of them. And, you know, it's a very modern service these days. You don't just hand somebody a gun and say you're in the Army now. They're very highly trained and specialized individuals, and hopefully some of what they learn prepares them for life on the inside of society once they retire, either at the end of their 2 or 3 year hitch or after a long time with the service as you did. Tell us a little bit before we open it up to callers who want to ask you about all the many, many hot spots around the world. Tell us a little bit about Sudden Threat.
Sudden Threat, as you mentioned, Gary, is a work of fiction. It's a book that takes place in April of 2002. If you recall, at that time we were just winding up Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan, and about that time the winds were blowing pretty hard toward Iraq. And so I asked myself the question, what if there were some folks inside the Beltway that actually wanted to oppose the run-up to the Iraq War and could do something about that? And so that's one question I address in this novel. And the other question I address, if you also recall around that time, members of our coalition, allies, were sort of dropping like flies. France said no, Germany said no, that they weren't going to participate. And so I asked the question, what if an ally did more than passively defect? What if they wanted to do a Machiavellian geopolitical move? So I take those two questions, and it provides for the strategic framework of the novel. And then I have two heroes. They're brothers. One's a CIA operator, one's a Army officer, and they get caught in the crossfire of these competing conspiracies that wind up with a lot of combat in the Philippines. And so that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of the book. And some have called it an alternative history thriller because there is so much reality in it. And I do write from a very boots-on-the-ground perspective. I try to capture the visceral emotion of combat on the ground, what it's like to be shot at, what it's like to shoot at the enemy. And ultimately, I dedicate this novel to 3 of my soldiers who were killed in combat, and that's one of the reasons that I contribute 100% of my royalties to the Hospital Services Fund that the USO has here in Metro D.C. Walter Reed and Bethesda being their 2 main areas of operation there.
Nobody would have done anything but thank you if you donated 10% of the royalties to the USO, but 100%, that's just unbelievable. Let me ask you about some of these hotspots around the world. And, I would have thought that Iran would have probably been, I think, at the top of the list of areas that would have been concerning to me. It's an issue that we discuss very often on this show, and as you can imagine, since we are internet-based, we get people from all around the world, including people who are in Iran and huge expatriated Iranian